Hi, this is Randy. Welcome to my channel, Omega Times, The Last Days. The Lord's good to me. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you would hit that subscribe button at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that little red button, and if you give me a like, a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. It helps me get this out to other people. I can reach more people for the Lord. We're going to talk today about dealing with grief. Everybody's going to deal with grief in life, and you have to learn how to handle grief. So we'll look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 4. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. If you're mourning and you've lost and had a loss in your life, the Lord will comfort you. But dealing with grief is something we have to deal with, all right? When your house or loved one or you lose something and a loved one passes away and you got to go through a grieving process, it's part of life. You learn to get through the grieving process. You say, well, I don't like that. I understand. None of us like it. I've lost my mother, my father, my grandmothers and grandfathers, both my sisters, my brother, and my brother's son's 12 years older than me, and he was like my big brother, not my nephew. He was like my big brother, and I lost him. So my immediate family that I had and my two brother-in-laws, my sisters' husbands, are all gone. They're not here no more. Now I have my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and I've got nieces and nephews all over the place. I took a count a couple years ago. It was like 58 or 60 nieces, nephews, great-nieces and nephews, and great-great-nieces and nephews. And so, anyway, thank God they're all young and they're still here. But death comes to everyone. It's appointed unto man that wants to die, and after that, the judgment. So you need to realize that death is something you have to learn to deal with, and grief is part of the process that you have to go through. And believe me, I've went through my share of grief. I also lost a grandson. I preached his funeral. Hardest thing I ever did in my life was preach a funeral of my grandson. Hope I never have to face that again. Sometimes you go down roads you don't want to go. Let me move on from there. When you leave one crisis, how you leave that crisis will be how you go into the next crisis. Are you going out defeated? Are you going down depressed? How are you coming out of it? You need to go through the process of grieving. Once you went through that process, you should come out a better person and get beyond what's going on, and you're ready to face the next crisis. Lord, don't want to, but eventually it's going to come. Crisis sometimes can mean you worked on a job for 22 years and your job ends. That's a crisis in your life. Maybe it's the only job you ever had. You went to work there right out of high school. That's a severe crisis, a big loss. You've been around people you like and people you work with. You wouldn't have stayed there 22 years. I've seen that happen to people that worked there for 30 years, wound up losing their job. I ran into one lady that went to work at the dealership where I worked at. She worked 38 years at the place as a bookkeeper, was in charge of all the payroll, and they sold the place. And they moved the jobs overseas, and she wound up getting a job being our bookkeeper. A couple months later, we needed one, and she was the best one we ever had. But she lost her job, and she told me she was totally lost. That she went to work there right out of high school, and she was just totally lost. Crisis is hard to deal with. Grief is hard to deal with, but you must deal with it. We must learn to deal with grief and loss. It's part of life. It's going to happen, and it's okay to grieve. You got to tell yourself it's okay to grieve. I know they say men shouldn't cry. I'm telling you, I cry. All right, when I lost my grandson, I cried like a baby. When I lost my mother and father, my two sisters, my brother, my brother's boy, which was like my older brother, I cried at all of them. Why? Because I grieved, because I loved them. I was going to miss them. All right? And to look at the hurt. The Bible tells us when we mourn, we shall be comforted. So dealing with grief is a part of life. We don't like it, but we have to do it. All right? It's just the way it is. But it will help us all in the long run. And at one time or another, you're going to have to deal with grief. You're going to have a loved one die. A mother, a father, a sister, a brother, A child, God forbid. God forbid. Grandparents, close friend you've been friends with all their life, and they pass away. You feel that empty spot. You grieve for them. Why? I got friends, if something happened to them, I would grieve because they're my friend. I love them like they're a family member, and I'd hate to lose them. But it will happen to all of us in life. It's appointed unto man once to die, after that the judgment. You know the old saying they've used for years and years, death and taxes. You can't get away from either one of them. We're all going to go down that road of death. So we need to be right with God. Grief is normal. Jesus did not say to mourn, and he did not say, blessed are they that do mourn. Jesus did not say to us that you're more spiritual than someone else if you mourn this way or that way. What did the word tell us? It says, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Why? Grief is normal. And we need to realize that not only is grief normal, but we need to realize that when we mourn, we will be comforted. You have to go through the mourning. You have to go through the grief, and it's hard to do, but you have to do it. Don't be afraid to talk about a loved one that's passed on. It's part of the healing process. Don't be afraid to bring up their name because they've gone on. You can do that. It's part of the grieving process. Being able to say, oh, I remember the time that my dad took me fishing. I remember the time my mother did this or that. There's nothing wrong with that. It helps you get past the grieving process. Grieving is normal. We should not grieve ourselves to death, though. But we need to go through the grieving process and go on with life. Paul told us in 1 Thessalonians 4:13, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep. In other words, they passed on. So that you will not grieve as you do the rest that have no hope. Who's the ones that have no hope? Non-Christians. All right, non-Christians. When a person isn't Christian and they die, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, I've had people practically not say, but try to get me to preach somebody into heaven that I knew wasn't going to heaven. I mean, unless they did something I didn't know about, by their fruits they'll be known. And I've had to preach funerals for people that I couldn't even say one good thing about him. Guy was a drunk. Everybody in the family wanted nothing to do with him. He wound up all alone and a bitter person and all that. And you're there to preach a funeral. And you go to his wife and say, well, did he belong to the Elks? No. The Moose? Any kind of club? No. Did he serve in the military? No. Okay, well, did he, run a Boy Scout troop and sell Christmas trees at Christmas? I'm trying to find something good to say about the guy. She looks me in my face and says, good luck with that. I said, ma'am, I just want to find something that I can say that's positive about your husband. She said, all I can tell you is he was a drunk. He was abusive. And I have she was crying. I have mixed emotions about him. In other words, I don't know. I didn't delve into it like, did he, was he a good guy? I mean, she told me the only thing I could say about him is he was a drunk. And so I talked to his brother, I talked to his kids. I went through the place talking to each person, and I couldn't find what. Isn't that sad to die? And you have a room with 50 or 60 people in it at the viewing, and people coming in and out, and they nobody has nothing good to say about him. Nothing. Zero. I stood in the back of the room. Some people didn't know me. I wasn't wearing a tie and a suit coat. I was there for the visitation. I had a nice dress shirt on, nice dress slacks, and all that. I'm standing in the back, and I'd hear people say, I came for her. I didn't come from him. He was a bum. And I heard people say all sorts of things about that guy, and I sit there and listened. I never been to a funeral where I couldn't hear one good thing about a person. But I did that day. So I preached a sermon and did the funeral to comfort the people that were there. So if some of them were grieving, even some of them were family members that didn't want to see him die, and they had love for him, but they didn't like what he did. And so that they still had to go through the grieving process. You have to go through it. You have to get past it, all right? It's okay to go through grieving. It's scriptural. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. If we weren't going to mourn about people, we weren't going to go through the grieving process, the Lord wouldn't have put that in there that you be comforted. He'll comfort you, help you get through it. He won't keep you from it. You're going to lose your loved ones eventually, or you're going to go before them, whatever. Some people, because they lost a loved one or a job, or they go through a bitter divorce, and they think that there's no destiny for their life and they have no purpose. And therefore, they become real bitter on life. And they haven't properly grieved about the people they've lost. They haven't properly grieved about the job they went through. Grieve about it. You worked there 25 years, they let you go, all right? You get through the grieving process and move on with your life. Get a different job. You may even get a better job. I've seen a lot of people got better jobs when they moved on. I had one job where I just was not happy. And I left. I didn't even have a job. I put in my resignation and I left. Gave me a big bonus, helped my job for me for 2 months, gave me a car to drive, said, please come back, I don't want you to leave, and all that, but they were working me to death. I had no time for my wife and children. And they were grieving for me. They were missing me. So I immediately got a job in 2 hours. And the guy called my old employer, and they were partners in another store, and he told them that I left and what happened. As soon as he hung up, he called me. The only problem was the number he had was my mother's. Well, my mother's number got changed. My mother had the same phone number for over 40 years. And she got her phone number changed because she had a man harassing her all night long, giving her trouble. Some guy had a loose screw, all right? And so she got rid of the number. 3.2 million people living within a 50-mile radius of the Arch in St. Louis. He calls that number, and it's a guy I go to church with. His wife answers the phone. He asked for me. She said, this is not his phone number, but I know him. Oh, you know him? How? I go to church with him. Do you know how to get a hold of him? She said, yeah. I can call. She said, I don't want to give his number out unless he tells me it's all right, but I'll get him a message. So he told her. So she called my wife at work. My wife called me and said, you need to call Brian. I said, what? He said he needs to talk to you right away. So I'm in my car in a park feeding ducks. Like, where am I going to work? What am I going to do? I bought some bread at the Dale Bakery. We're feeding the ducks. My pager went off. I went in the bag phone before they had cell phones. And I called my wife. I said, what's up? She said, she knew I was going to leave. She said, Brian called and says he wants to talk to you immediately. So I called him. And he said, hey, come to work for me. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, he told me you left. You're not there. Be a manager for me. I want you to buy all the cars for both my stores. I want you to help manage that other store for me and help me out. I want you to go to work. He said, I can't pay you quite as much as he did, but I'll provide you with health insurance. I'll give you a demo, and I'll pay you a fair salary, and we'll work it all out. I'll meet you tomorrow. But I said, well, I got to take this car back. I told him the deal I made with him, and I keep it 60 days or till I get a job. He goes, well, take it back there. I'll have a guy meet you there, send one of my drivers. So I drove back over to Illinois and drove up, and the owner was getting ready to leave when I walked in. He goes, oh, to change your mind, decided to come back to work. I said, no, I got a job. You told me if I got a job to bring the keys back. The car's sitting out there. He said, do you have a job lined up? I said, no. When I walked out that door today, I didn't have a job. Well, where are you going to work at? I said, for your partner. He hired me. I can't believe he did that. I said, well, he told me he'd give me hours to where I could be at home to be with my family, and he would give me every other Saturday off so I could go places with my children. I'd have time to read my Bible and study. I preach on the weekends a lot, and he told me, I'll reduce your workload. He said, he can't pay you the kind of money I pay you. I said, I know, but he can reduce my workload. Well, I left. Guess what? They hired 3 managers to replace me. A used car manager, a new car manager, and a general sales manager. And I was running all by myself. And I begged for help, but after I leave, then they hired 3 guys. Who knows? I grieved a lot over that job. A lot of times I thought I made a mistake, but once I made the move, I knew I made the right move. Why? Because I'm not going to sit there and grieve about a job and grieve all the time. I was grieving for my family. I wanted to be with my wife. I wanted to be with my children. And the only way I could do it was reduce my hours. And I asked so many times, couldn't get it done. So I moved on. God took care of it for me. I wind up looking at all those things that happened to get me the word. He hears from the owner. He calls the woman in St. Louis who has my mom's old phone number. She goes to church with me. She calls my wife at work. My wife calls me. Then I call him. Hey, what? God does marvelous things. I thank the Lord for that. I was sitting in the park grieving because I really loved my job and the people I trained and was working for me, but I felt I needed to move on. And I was grieving. I was actually had tears running down my face when he called me, but the tears turned to joy after that. Paul's saying that the dead are really more alive than we are. All right? They're more alive than we are. When the death is not the final thing, when they die, they go to be with the Lord. They're more alive than we are. So we should not worry about grieving. We need to do it. It's a grieving process. We're all not grieving for them, but sometimes we're grieving for ourselves at our loss and what we have lost. And therefore, it causes us to grieve because we know that we're not going to see them no more in this life, and we're going to lose being around them. People in heaven don't grieve or mourn for us. All right, they don't do that up there in heaven because they know that this is not the final spot. We mourn with hope of a better life when we move on to be with the Lord. But to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. In anything we go through in life that's difficult from time to time, we need the Holy Spirit to lead us, guide us, direct us, give us comfort. Lord, teach us to get through the grieving process. Teach us to be a better person, Lord. And let God lead you through your grieving process. How can you be comfort someone if you're not comforted yourself? How can you offer comfort to someone that's going through the grieving process if you've never been through it yourself or never dealt with it? Some people don't deal with it. Best way to deal with it is, I had a relative who would not go to any hospital, visit any family member who was sick. Didn't want to go to hospitals. If they died, he wouldn't go to the funeral. He loved them, but he didn't want to go to the funeral. He didn't want to be around it. All right? He said, I'm afraid of death, and I don't like thinking about it. I said, well, one thing you need to realize, we're all going to die. You're going to have to face it someday. Be better to be prepared for it. And he said, it just makes me grieve so bad. We can't comfort people if we're not comforted ourselves. We have to remember when you go through problems in life, you have to get through them, and you have to get beyond them and get peace and get over it. Whatever you're going through and whatever you're grieving about, long-term job, long-term marriage that went awry, or a death in the family, you need to learn how to grieve with it and get through it. Never tell someone you know what they're going through if you haven't been through it. Let me tell you that. When I lost my grandson, I had people come up to me and say, I know what you're going through. And I turned to them and say, have you lost a grandchild? Well, no. I go, oh, then you don't know what I'm going through. And boy, they looked at me with big old eyes and I'm sorry. I go, that's okay. Please don't tell me that. If you've never lost a grandchild, don't tell me you know what it's like. You have no idea. Don't ever tell someone you know what they're going through if you've never went through it. If they lost a long-term job they had for 30 years, they don't know where they're going to work. That's the only place they ever worked. And they're totally lost and they're grieving over their job. If you've never lost a job, if you've never had that happen to you, don't tell people, I know what you're going through. Because that will not help them one bit. It might even light up a little anger in them because they know that you've never lost a job after 30 years on the job and it ended for you. So please, when you tell people that are grieving, don't go to them and tell them, I feel your pain, if you don't know that pain. You've never been down that road yourself. All right? Threw that in for A little extra. The God of comfort comforts us. We rejoice with them that rejoice. We weep with them that weep. If Jesus tarries, all of us are going to suffer loss in our life. We're all going to lose loved ones. It's going to happen. We're going to lose our own self. Someday we'll face death. Not thinking about it, not preparing for it, not doing anything. You can do what you want to do, but it won't help you. You need to deal with grief. Grief is a normal thing that people go through in life. We should not give ourselves over to death and let it overcome us, but we need to go through the process and get on with our life. Life moves on. We had a man in our church one time, was married to a woman for 56 years. 56 or 57, excuse me. And he lost his wife. And my dad talked to him, and he says, "Are you doing okay?" And the guy said, "Oh yeah, I'm all right." And Dad goes, "Are you sure?" He says, "Yeah, I go out the cemetery every day, and I talk to her." Well, the whole thing in a nutshell was, he was taking a little chair and going out the cemetery and took fresh flowers every day, and he'd sit in that chair by her grave and talk to her tombstone. But that's okay to get through your grieving period. But when you've been going there every day for 2 solid months, and you just keep going every day, and you keep sitting on the chair talking, she's gone. She can't hear you. I know sometimes I've tried to talk to my mother and father when they first died, in my mind, or say something. I knew they were gone and everything, but he was grieving real bad. My dad said, "You need to stop going out there every day. Your wife loved helping children that were poor and indigent." He said, "Yeah, I know. She did all them. She brought candy to kids at church. She bought kids clothes. She'd take kids that were come to church on the bus that hair was messed up. Maybe they were a little dirty. Their parents didn't go to church. She'd take them back to the bathroom and wash them off. She brought wash rags, and she would bring combs and brushes and brush their hair and comb back. She loved to help all the kids." My dad said, "Why don't you do something for the children in the church? Take your grief and turn it into something good." So he did. He started buying candy for the kids, and started being real nice to the children, which he never liked children. Him and her, I don't think they ever had any kids. And he started being a different person, all right? He couldn't continue to go out the cemetery every day for 1 or 2 hours and just go on and on and on. But that's what he did. But he had to get through the grieving period. Well, after 2 months, he started dating. He had a woman in church. He asked her to go out to dinner with him. She was a widow woman. They went to dinner, and he drove her home. Then the next Sunday, he did it again for 3 or 4 Sundays. Several of the old ladies in the church that were born in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they went to my dad and said, "She's not even cold in the grave, and he's taking her out to eat every Sunday." My dad said, "Let me tell you something, ladies. 2 years from now, she'll be no more dead than she is today. She's no more dead today than she was 2 months ago when she passed away. It says, 'Till death do us part.' She departed. His marriage to her was over. When she gave up the ghost, went to heaven, it was over. She'll be no more dead a year from now than she will be today." "Oh yeah, but you should grieve and you should go through. You shouldn't even do anything for a year and all this." You know how people are. They just think they know what's best for you. My dad said, "Leave him alone. He's done nothing wrong. For 2 months, he's lived at the cemetery, and he'll eat supper sometimes, go out to the cemetery and sit there till dark time. He needed to move on. So he asked a lady in the church to go out to eat, and he takes her out to eat on Sundays. And then sometimes they go for a ride, and he drops her off at her house, picks her back up Sunday night for Sunday night church. What does that matter to you? Would you rather him sit out at the cemetery all the time and grieve himself to death? Till death do us part. He fulfilled his obligation, and he went through 2 months of severe grieving. Now he's starting to get a smile on his face. Now he's helping the children in the church. He's found a new life, taking the lady out on Sunday and being able to go around the church and help all the children. Let him do it. That's what he's there for. Oh, they didn't like that, but you know how people are. They don't realize that you have to go through a grieving period, but it has to end sometimes. 2 Samuel 12, 19, and 20 says, "But when David saw that his servants were whispering together, David perceived that the child was dead." His child, his son. "So David said to the servants, 'Is the child dead?' They said, 'He is dead.' So David arose from the ground and washed himself, anointed himself, changed his clothes, and he came into the house of the Lord and worshiped the Lord. Then he came to his own house, and when he requested that they should set food before him so he could eat, David grieved and fought hard for his child until his child was gone. Then he could no longer do anything." Now, I'm going to end this by what David said, and I hope that you will get something out of this post. If you're grieving, God can help you get through it. Read the Bible, read the scriptures I gave you, pray, but get past it. You have to stop sometime. But what did David say? And I'm going to say it to you. I've used it many times at funerals. David said, he cannot come to me, his son that died. He cannot come to me, but I can go to him. He can't come to me, but I can go to him. Make your heart right with God. Be prepared to get through grieving. And be prepared that someday that loved one that you lost, they can't come to you, but you can go to them. Get right with God. Give your heart to the Lord. If you're grieving about a loss of a loved one or a long-term job or whatever it may be, I knew a lady one time, I'll just say this real quick, I won't get into a long story. She was married 52 years. Her husband come home one day and told her he wanted a divorce, and he left her. And he did divorce her. She was totally lost, totally crushed. Almost ruined her life. But guess what? She bounced back. And she was a better person, and she did fine. And she's still alive today and still going strong. Let me tell you something. God wants you to get past the grieving. And you can't go, they can't come to you, but you can go to them. Remember that and get past the grieving. Please subscribe to the bottom right-hand channel. I know I'm a little different than most ministers on there. I don't critique other ministers. I'm not saying anybody does it is not a good person. That's just not me. I'm doing what I do if I was in the pulpit today. I'm teaching you just like I would my own congregation. I just love sharing the gospel. I realize I'm never going to be popular on YouTube. I'm never going to have 100,000 subscribers, or maybe not even 1,000. I don't know. It is what it is. But let me tell you something. I'm doing what the Lord wants me to do, share the gospel. Who hears it, who sees it, that's the ones that see it. Hopefully someone will need it. I love you. Thank you for your time. This time, till next time. So long. Old Rev May signing off. Have a wonderful day.